Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to talk about just kind of the overall market state that we're in, because overall it's kind of looking to me like we might be sitting in a little bit of a no trade zone, and let me explain why. So let's go on ahead and dive right in. So I think the best way to start is kind of just getting a general sense of the overall market, where we're at, and then we'll go in and explain why potentially this could be a no trade zone and why it may not be a good idea for you to be trading, at least short term. Long term, I think we are probably in a good stage of the market where if you're planning to hold for a relatively reasonable amount of time, you can kind of buy whenever. Obviously the best time to buy would have been right after about FTX or whatever, but I do still think personally I think there's more to go. If you also subscribe to that notion that we're going to be having kind of this large bull run and we're going to see something similar to last time, I don't think we'll see something to the same magnitude of last time. I think it'll probably be a little bit less in terms of just how crazy things went kind of towards the top, but I do think kind of a similar outcome is possible, just like I said, to a lessened degree. So, but looking short term in the market, what we can see is today we are looking at a overall red day in the market. We're also seeing this on kind of a red day or a red week in the market as well. We are seeing some pretty good movement overall, though. We are seeing kind of some of the leaders be not meme coins. I mean, Solana has been one that's done particularly well. Radium has done another. Jupiter, Helium, all of these are Solana ecosystem tokens. We are seeing some meme coins up here still. Safe has been one that has kind of been the big winner of the day. Everything else has kind of been down. So overall, kind of looking not too bad overall. The Bitcoin chart is looking pretty good, I would say. We have kind of broken out and kind of held just barely above this descending channel. Nothing too crazy yet, but putting in volume kind of above this line, I do think is a good thing. We have hit and been rejected by this point of resistance here now twice, and so not a great thing. We do want to probably take another run at this and break. I think that, again, this is why I say we're kind of in a no trade zone. I don't think we have the bullish momentum realistically to probably get past this until after the election. Right now, what we are seeing though on the chart is something pretty important, pretty interesting. What I've drawn here is I've drawn two lines. This right here is what we can see is this is a case of bullish divergence. So we can see that the price was higher here, but on the RSI, it was lower on the RSI chart. And so this is usually a good thing and something that we need to see as far as making sure that we kind of have the room to run. Obviously, if RSI continues to creep up with price, it continues to kind of fall into the overbought territory, which often means that you're probably going to be seeing some pulling back into this channel. When we do see price move up but RSI move down, essentially it's giving us more room that we can kind of work our way up the chart without getting into overbought. We can see kind of this exact situation here where we were sitting at this point in time and then we were able to move further up, way further up the chart than what we would have been previously before we started hitting into the overbought, and we can see we just barely reached into overbought, and then we've started to kind of pull back a little bit. We can see something, not necessarily a bullish divergence here, but kind of to a lesser degree, right? We can see on this pullback, there's a very, very steep slope in terms of kind of like low to low. And from here, we can see, kind of a much shallower slope in terms of low to low. So, recovery on the RSI chart is happening a lot quicker, which is really, really good because it's giving us room to kind of continue to climb our way up the chart, which is really, really good. Things with it that we would like to see and that we would expect to see kind of as we're hopefully setting up for this kind of breakout run that a lot of us are thinking we might see, particularly once we break all-time highs. We are still about $6,000 per Bitcoin away from that, but I do think kind of once we do hit that, I mean, we could see a pretty ridiculous move and kind of just teleporting up to maybe 85, 90, 100K maybe. There's some people that are calling for $300,000 and $350,000 Bitcoin. I think if that happens, things are going to get wild. I don't really believe that that's going to happen. I think that seems a little bit too ridiculous. But you never know, right? Like none of this is financial advice. You should not be listening to me for financial decision-making advice, just because I don't know what's going to happen. I can't predict the future, and so I know just as little as you do as far as what's going to happen. So I want to look at a couple other pieces of data that are kind of look at the position that we're in, because even though we might be in what I would consider kind of a no trade zone, kind of running up to this U.S. election, there is a lot of really bullish indicators kind of showing up on the chart here, right? So regardless of whether you're going to be short-term trading or not, the macro environment still does look pretty decent for what we're planning to see. And so, obviously what we can see here on the halving progress, obviously 2012, 2013, we've already kind of seen the first leg up, and then we saw a pullback, and then we would see kind of the second leg up. And this would happen probably about middle of 2025 if we were to see kind of a late run here. Same thing with the 2017, 2018 run. We actually would kind of be early in the cycle if we were to start kind of moving up. This was a slow and kind of sustained run that ran pretty long and pretty hard. If we were to see something like this, this would be, we would essentially kind of see a slow climb all the way to what would be an eventual top for Bitcoin, probably late in 2025. This is something that I do think is a possibility, and it's something that is an option that I would not be too surprised if we saw. But I think there's kind of two ways that this plays out, right? I think, maybe after the election, we kind of see some really dramatic and quick move on the Bitcoin chart up to what we might see as kind of highs for the cycle. And then we kind of start, doing a little bit of this and kind of moving on. Or we could see maybe a small jump kind of in the near term, and then we kind of do something like this, pull back a little bit, and then make a second run up before we then ultimately come back down. I think that's probably what we might see. The other thing is we could maybe see where we don't actually see any like near-term movement after the US election, and it's kind of a fake out, and then we kind of run into it. Maybe there's some economic or financial uncertainty or something that kind of suppresses the price of crypto leading towards the end of this year, and then it's kind of like middle to end of next year is when we would see that run up. I think that's kind of what would look kind of most like this chart. But something kind of happening right after this election, I think would kind of look closely or most closely to like last cycle. So anyway, looking at what we're seeing here, that kind of is what I'm seeing. I do think that, we do have kind of a lot of potential options. So I don't think there's like, if we haven't seen a move by December 1, like it's just not going to happen. I don't think that's the case at all. If we got towards like the end of 2025 and we hadn't seen any sort of meaningful move up, then I might start to be wondering, like, is the 4-year cycle broken, and how would that potentially look? The other thing that we also need to be considering when we're looking at potential timing of moves like this is global liquidity. And what is global liquidity doing? Right now, we have started entering the rate cut cycle. The Chinese have gone very aggressively to kind of stabilize the fiscal situation in their economy. There's a lot of people who've kind of moved towards quantitative easing rather than quantitative tightening. And so that is something that I do think could potentially push us. When, though, we don't know, right? Because if we have kind of more of like a black swan event or some, global economic uncertainty that kind of pushes us down in the near term, that realistically would probably be fairly bearish for crypto in the very short term. However, what that means is everybody's going to be turning on the money printers. Depending on kind of what type of black swan we see, maybe they're giving out free money like they did in COVID, doing all that type of stuff. And then that long term would, I think, even though we'd see short term pain, would be ridiculously positive for kind of what we'd see as like local tops for the cycle. I think that would produce ultimately higher highs, but it may be like later highs also at the same time. So that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it and kind of how I'm viewing it right now. Also, if we look at the RSI heat map, what we can see in the market, it's kind of mimicking or kind of, I guess, in consensus with this like no trade zone, right? We're kind of sitting in neutral. Nothing's too overbought. Nothing's too oversold. The market is not too bearish. The market is not too bullish. It's just kind of waiting and seeing, trying to figure out what comes next, which I think is probably what a lot of the world and particularly the US is trying to figure out right now as well. So, that's something that where right now it's overall pretty stable, I would say. Obviously we have kind of some outliers here and there, but the majority of the market, as we can see on the daily or the 24-hour time frame, is sitting at kind of neutral. If we were to go longer out on the time frame, we could see still neutral. And then if we start to go shorter down, also, like just the whole everything is leaning towards kind of sitting in the neutral zone right now. If we look at open interest and volume, what we can see though is still a ton of interest and a ton of volume moving through the crypto markets. We can see we're still sitting at all-time highs for open interest. We've come down a tiny bit. If we were to zoom this in a little bit, we've come down a tiny bit from kind of the recent all-time highs. But if we look at like today, we're still, very close to kind of what was previous all-time highs back here. So obviously still a ton of interest in the space, a ton of volume moving through. It's catching the eyes of people with much deeper pockets, which, obviously is good for the early adopters. So That's kind of what we're seeing now. If we kind of zoom this out a little bit, we can see, obviously there is a downtrend on volume overall, but volume is still holding, much higher than what we were seeing back in here, which is good to see. So the other thing I wanted to mention as well, and this is what I would consider kind of like the like sleeper of crypto, because this, I think, cannot really be understated how important this is for the future of crypto, as well as the future of like just kind of product market fit, adoption, all of that type of stuff. So it's really good for kind of bringing the world on chain. And I think, based on kind of my viewer metrics, a lot of my audience, and I would say probably the vast majority of my audience, is either American or from the West more generally. So, the US, Europe, Australia, Japan, kind of like, I don't know, Google a geopolitical map of what's considered the West, and that's kind of like what I'm meaning. But realistically, like what I mean by the West is, in the West, people don't really understand the value of crypto just generally, right? I mean, most of us are banked. Most of us, if we want to go buy a sandwich, we just go swipe a piece of plastic and money comes out from somewhere, and, things do stuff and, stuff like that. So for us, like the concept of a stable coin, also given the fact that we live and operate in US dollars, the concept of a stable coin is kind of like meh, right? Like it's not really that useful. It's not like much of like a revelation. We don't really like need it for anything unless we, are potentially doing like cross-border transactions, and maybe we want it for like the speed of doing things like that. But I would say those use cases are kind of very, very niche and not at all common by like the average American, you could say, right? And so in America, the stable coin is not something that is really thought of with kind of much. I would say there's kind of a general sense of like apathy towards stable coins, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if you start to look at it from a more international perspective, looking at some of the Southeast Asian countries, African countries, potentially somewhere in Latin America, I know for a while the Argentine currency was kind of hyperinflating, a lot of people in Argentina were kind of flocking towards stable coins because it was helping keep their purchasing power a little bit more stable than what it would be with the Argentine currency. A lot of the unbanked population, particularly Africa, Southeast Asia, stuff like that, it gives them the ability to transact and have digital currency that they can kind of move around, and it becomes a lot easier for a lot of these people to interact and transact on a more global scale, and even at a more local scale too. And so stable coins are something that I think are really kind of proving the product market fit of crypto at a global scale. And I think this is massively overlooked in the West, which is why a lot of people don't really get it. And I think there's a lot of like things being overlooked here. And so what we can see is pretty strong growth. This is actually by each individual stablecoin, but if we look, this is actually the like total stablecoin market cap, and we can see from the beginning of the year we had about 120 billion in stablecoins, and we're now sitting at about 160 billion in stablecoins, which for like less than a year, seeing what is that, like 33% growth, like that is massive growth. And even if we start to zoom this out a tiny bit more, like we can see 2020 stablecoins didn't even exist. So in 4 years, it went from zero to being, 120 billion or 160 billion, market cap. Like that's kind of insane, right? And so I think if we continue to see this level of growth within the space, this is going to be something that is going to kind of really force the hand of some of these larger players, because this is a very large market that can be serviced. And so that's one of the things that I want to kind of point out. As we're kind of sitting and looking at the crypto fundamentals, stablecoins is something that I think is kind of a sleeper and might really help kind of the overall state of the market. So if you found the information in this video useful, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me out. Also, earlier on in the video, you could see we were doing my charting on Margex. I do trade for leverage trading up to 100x. On Margex, there's no KYC or VPN required, so if that's something that you're interested in, you can just get signed up and start trading. It's really nice, and I find it quite a useful tool, particularly when we're trading choppiness. As I've said right now, not necessarily the best time to trade, but especially when we start to see some movements. If we're playing some of these major gains on 100x leverage, you can make a ton of money really quickly. But also just do remember that there are risks associated with trading like that. So if you're not already aware of them, make sure that you get aware before you start trading, because that can be a pretty dangerous thing to do if you're not fairly educated on how that works. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.